Today, we are climbing way up high, into the mountains, to get to the bottom of a really bizarre and honestly kind of unsettling thing that happens to people when they sleep. It's a feeling a lot of high-altitude adventurers know, but not many can actually explain.
So, have you ever been there? You're sleeping at high altitude and you jolt awake, heart absolutely pounding, with this terrifying feeling that you just stopped breathing? If you have, you are not alone. It is a super common experience, but what is actually going on inside your body?
Well, this whole experience has a name, and it all comes down to how your body is trying and kind of failing to cope with the thin mountain air. So let's unpack the science behind this strange breath of the mountains.
What you're experiencing is called high-altitude periodic breathing, or HABB for short. And this is the most important part. It's a form of central sleep-disordered breathing. That means the problem isn't a physical blockage in your throat, like a collapsed airway. Nope. This is a communication glitch happening deep inside your brainstem.
And the trigger for this whole cascade of events? It's actually pretty simple. As you go higher up, the air gets thinner. Now, the percentage of oxygen is still 21%, same as at sea level, but the air pressure drops. And that means with every single breath you take, there's just less pressure pushing oxygen into your lungs and into your blood. Your body's basically running on a low fuel warning.
So how does your body respond to this oxygen deficit? Well, it tries to fix it, of course. But in the process, it creates this really unstable, wonky feedback loop. Let's break down exactly how this fascinating and, let's be honest, frustrating cycle actually works. Okay, so check out this cycle. First, your body senses that low oxygen, and it starts to panic a little bit. It makes you breathe faster and deeper. You start hyperventilating to try and grab more O2. But this has an unexpected side effect. You start blowing off way too much carbon dioxide. And here is the absolute key to the whole puzzle. Your brain's primary signal to take a breath isn't low oxygen, it's rising CO2. So when your carbon dioxide levels crash, your brainstem just goes, oh, okay, I guess we don't need to breathe right now, and it hits pause. Of course, while you're not breathing, CO2 builds back up, which then screams at your brain to start breathing again, and boom, the whole crazy cycle just repeats, over and over.
And this right here really shows the huge difference between HIPB and what most of us think of when we hear sleep apnea. With obstructive sleep apnea, it's a plumbing problem. The airway physically closes off. But with HAPB, as you can see, the airway is wide open. The issue isn't mechanical at all. It's a conflict in your body's own command and control center.
Right, so you might be wondering, why don't I notice this weird breathing pattern when I'm hiking around during the day? Why does it wait until I'm asleep to totally freak me out? Well, the answer is all about the two different ways we control our breathing.
See, when you're awake, you have what's called behavioral control. You can decide to take a deep breath, you can hold your breath, you can talk. All that conscious input acts like a stabilizing force, and it basically overrides that unstable feedback loop we just talked about.
But the second you fall asleep, that conscious control just vanishes. Your breathing switches over to a purely automatic system, run entirely by your brainstem. And this autopilot system is way more sensitive to those chemical signals, the O2 and the CO2. This makes it super vulnerable to that push and pull, which is what results in that on-again, off-again periodic breathing. So, at what point do you really need to start thinking about this? Well, the general rule of thumb is right around 8,000 feet. That's about 2,500 meters. Once you get above that elevation, the drop in oxygen pressure is usually enough to start triggering this unstable breathing pattern in more and more people. And the results of this cycle? Well, they're exactly what you'd imagine. It's not just that terrifying feeling of breathlessness. The constant waking up leads to really fragmented, restless sleep. That can leave you with a pounding headache and feeling totally wiped out the next day, which is the last thing you want when you're supposed to be enjoying the mountains. And a lot of times, it's actually your sleeping partner who notices it first, hearing that weird cycle of heavy breathing followed by silence.
But here's the good news. This isn't something you just have to suffer through. Because it's a predictable physiological response, there are some very effective ways to manage it. So let's get into the toolkit.
The single best #1 thing you can do is just give your body time to adjust. A slow, gradual ascent lets your internal chemistry catch up. Your whole system, including your kidneys, works to rebalance your blood, and that helps tame that wacky feedback loop. The classic advice is there for a reason. Climb high, but sleep low.
Now, for people who are prone to this or are going up kind of fast, there's a really effective medication called acetazolamide. Maybe you've heard of it as Diamox. How it works is pretty clever. It actually makes your blood just a little bit more acidic. This basically tricks your brain into thinking your CO2 levels are higher, which keeps your drive to breathe switched on all night long, preventing those scary pauses.
And finally, there's the most direct solution of all: supplemental oxygen. Just by breathing a tiny bit of extra O2 while you sleep, you attack the problem right at the source. You stabilize your blood oxygen levels, which tells your body, hey, no need to panic and hyperventilate. It calms the whole system down and breaks that cycle before it can even get started. So, let's wrap this up. The biggest thing to remember is that high-altitude periodic breathing is not a disease. It's just your body's normal, if a little clumsy, response to low oxygen. It's all about that unstable feedback loop between O2 and CO2 that kicks in while you're asleep, usually above 8,000 feet. Gradual acclimatization is your best defense, for sure, but things like acetazolamide and oxygen are amazing tools to have. And don't forget, the ultimate failsafe is simple. Just go down. The symptoms will disappear almost instantly.
You know, once you understand the science behind HAB, it changes from this scary, mysterious thing into a predictable and, most importantly, a manageable challenge. So, as you plan your next big mountain adventure, the question isn't if your body will react anymore. The question is, how will you prepare to help it succeed?